Hey everyone. All right. So we are going to get going. We just wanted to let the Zoom load a little bit. Welcome. Thank you all for being here, are transitioning to a new normal. A couple things I want to point out at the very bottom of your screen. If you hover, you will see a Q&A. If there are any questions or anything that you want to ask any of us, that would be the place to do it. If you click on the Q&A, it will pop up and you can ask a question. I'm Kari, Provizer, the director of the Robert Sosnick Family Life Center at Temple Israel, and we are thrilled that you are here with us this afternoon. Most of us have been home for 10 weeks. Our world has been turned completely upside down. And I think we're all trying to control a situation that we don't have a lot of control over. It's hard for us to stay grounded. We worry. When we worry, we get anxious. And it's that whole cycle that we're going to talk about today. Re-entry and anxiety and how we deal with that. The new buzz phrase is re-entry anxiety. And that's what we're going to talk about. What is re-entry anxiety? Is it normal to feel afraid, fearful, and a little anxious? Is it weird to be afraid to leave your house? All of these things Dr. Bayer and Rabbi Kaluzny and I are going to talk with you about today. So we hope that we can acknowledge these feelings and talk about them. First, remember, post-lockdown anxiety is real. It is a real thing. We went into shelter at home for a reason, to protect ourselves and our loved ones. And now all of a sudden we're being told that it's going to be safe to go out again. So we have to deal with all of that and all of those feelings. The thought of reentry and the fear is really natural. We've all been home in these bubbles, our safe little house and in our safe little bubble, and leaving it is scary. So you get really comfortable with your new norm of being in your house, and now you might be worried about what's next. So those are all the things we're going to talk about today. Thank you for being here and joining us. Thank you so much to Dr. Bayer, and I'm going to turn this over to Rabbi Kaluzny.
Thank you, Kari. I'm so glad that I could be here with everybody today, and we definitely thank Kari Provizer and Dr. Alisa Bayer for being with us. And before we start, I just want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Bayer. Alisa Rautbort Bayer received her M.S.W. and Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Michigan. She has been seeing couples, individuals, and families for 32 years in private practice and treats adolescents and adults. She specializes in recovery from trauma, anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. She has led several groups at Temple Israel, including the divorce support groups and premarital groups. So if there's anyone who could be a go-to on this subject, I think it is Dr. Bayer. And so I leave it to you. Go ahead, Dr. Bayer.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for listening today. And I'm going to do my best, as I know all of us are going to do on this panel, to answer your questions and to handle what is obviously a very sensitive and challenging time for all of us. I think part of the biggest problem here is that even among the experts, there's not a consensus of how to proceed. There's a lot of mixed messages going on, and so that makes things even more difficult. So we're going to try to handle today with as much sensitivity and grace and honesty as we can. Also, I want to mention that in terms of transitioning to a new normal, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that it's a new normal, and the word normal, which I tend to never really love to use to begin with, is certainly a relative term. And as we each go through this journey, it's going to look different for each of us. And that's really to be expected because we're all individuals with previous histories of anxiety or no anxiety or little anxiety, with varying circumstances and all sorts of factors that are going to play a role as we navigate this time. Many of us have been, as Kari was mentioning, as we all know, we've been living in a cocoon, and we've acclimated to the protective feeling of that safety net. As we venture out of our safe space, we will have to balance continuing to stay safe and moving forward with some degree of movement outside of the cocoon. Now, I've really carefully thought about all of those words. They aren't random. And the reason I say some degree of movement is because movement is not going to be the same from one person to the other. And I say some degree of movement because for some people, what they choose to do is, even though we're told we can go outside, we can do some of these things, it doesn't mean that we have to. We have to listen to our inner voice and what feels comfortable for us. We all really have been connected by experiencing this trauma. And I'm using that word specifically about this because our worlds have been altered so much. We've endured many losses, changes, suddenly living in constant fear of the virus for our loved ones, for friends, for some people, for themselves. Although the thing I hear most commonly, I'm not worried about me, I'm worried about my parents, I'm worried about my children, I'm worried about my siblings, et cetera, et cetera. So as we move forward after trauma, it is very common to have feelings of anxiety or discomfort. The desire we have after trauma is to constrict, meaning to stay closed and to withdraw and to pull away and to make our circle smaller. The problem is the longer we've constricted, the harder it is to move forward. And it becomes harder with every passing day that we stay in our cocoons. Although my message is not leave the cocoon, my message is, if you hear it's going to be probably sent in a multitude of different ways, is we have to allow for individual paths and how we handle balancing both our health and the health of others, and sensitivity and responsibility towards that, as well as other factors in our lives that are meaningful to us. We each have decisions in how we choose to move forward. For one person, it might be leaving the house and going for a walk, because for that person, they may have barely left their house during this whole period of time. For someone else, it may be choosing to get together with friends and family outside of the home for the first time and social distancing. For another person, it might be resuming every possible option that has opened up. There really is not a right or wrong approach. And I'm probably going to say that throughout this whole time talking, because it is important not to judge someone if their approach is different than yours. Each person has to make their own decision of how to balance staying safe and venturing out. So I do know from my own practice, from my personal life, that people have strong, passionate feelings about what that should look like. And I'm not telling anybody they shouldn't have their strong, passionate feelings, but I do think it's important to remember that each person is going to be making a decision that's based on their own individual circumstances. And for each of us, those circumstances are a driving force in how we really negotiate with ourselves. And I think that's a part of what we're doing is in your own relationship with yourself, there's a negotiation going on. Can I do this? Should I do this? How important is it to me? What's important to me might not be as important to someone else. And I really think at a time when we have such fear that the more kindness we can have, the better. And it is very natural. It's human instinct to be judgmental. Everyone does that. It's impossible not to, but I'm really trying to give a message of love and compassion and support. We are all people and we can't control anyone, even if we want to control somebody because we think we're doing from a place of love or protectiveness. The truth is there's only one person we can sort of control, and that's ourselves. Living a fear-based existence prevents us from living our lives to the fullest. And we will be learning to live side by side with the virus as opposed to hiding from it, which I think is what a lot of us, not all of us, have been doing for the last several weeks. Our mental health and connection to others and activities we enjoy is also a very important part of our life and matters significantly. Time is a precious commodity. And the longer the virus is in our lives, the more difficult it becomes not to share time with loved ones and friends, or doing things that we enjoy doing with our time that are activity focused. Attending to other aspects of our physical health is also important. And we can't ignore our other preventative kinds of medical treatments or going to the doctors indefinitely in the face of uncertainty about the virus. So I think at this point, though I have some more things to share, I'd like to take a moment and see if anybody wants to respond to anything that's been said and kind of open up a dialogue, make this more of an interactive forum, and then I'll come back to some of my material.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Baer. We do have a few questions, so let's take a look. First, if you're on an iPad, the Q&A is in the upper right-hand corner, not at the bottom like it is on the computer. Okay, so our first question is, when gyms begin to open and 2 members out of 4 want to go in but are apprehensive, but if one is in our house, okay, so if someone in our house goes, it's like we're all going with the virus spreading. So I think the question is how to negotiate that fear and how to control other people's choices.
Well, I knew I was going to be asked this question in some format. I hadn't thought of the gym angle, so thank you for giving me a different spin on it. And I really have been thinking and trying to give an intelligent and thoughtful answer to that very, very genuinely difficult question that's being asked. I think that the reality is, when we live in a house with other people, we are one household right now when it comes to our choices and our actions do affect other people. And certainly I think we need to be sensitive to the actions we're taking and how they affect others in our household. The reason that this is such a difficult question, and I can't stop there, is because if we knew that this was going to be essentially over in a month, in 2 months, in 3 months, I feel very definitively, I would say that the household needs to make a decision and probably err on the side of the person who is the most cautious, because it's very circumscribed and time limited. But the longer that this goes on for, and for all practical purposes, we hear this is going to be an indefinitely long period of time, though it will end, and I'll come to that later. I think that we can't just have it be the one person who is more cautious. And it really is going to be a lot of communication and discussion within each household, and compromises that can be made of the areas that somebody who is more uncomfortable says, well, all right, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with this, but I will, say that that's okay. But maybe on this other aspect, which might be having some of your friends come into the house during this time, maybe that's where I draw my boundary. I realize that the only safety net we all have is to be with the people we've quarantined with and never leave. But I think the whole nature of our conversation is we are going to be leaving in some format. So I really think it is a very important dialogue to have with family members. And it's very hard for me to say, and the question asks that going to the gym or not going to the gym per se is the answer, as much as it is, I think it's going to be a series of ongoing negotiations between family members of how we're going to navigate this with sensitivity to both positions, because both positions are very valid and meaningful.
And you have to meet somewhere in the middle, right? You have to get on the same page somehow. And it's compromise, always.
Right, and maybe the home remains like sacred space in the terms that, like, if it makes the person inside the house feel better, you take off your shoes in the garage, or maybe you change clothes in the laundry room or the garage, so the person who really wants to keep that space at home sacred and what they deem to be safe, maybe take measures so that person, feels comfortable, but the other person is still able to go out and venture into the world in the way that they want to.
I think what's difficult, I love everything that both of you are offering. And I think what's difficult for me in my therapy at times is some decisions, I always encourage compromise, but some decisions, there is no compromise. There's either one person conceding or the other person sort of relenting to that position. I really always see compromise. The middle is going to be probably a series of situations where people's feelings are honored at different times, because there's not always going to be, the example of the garage does feel middle to me, because taking your clothes off or maybe showering before you come home could be something that might help people. But I think what is exceedingly difficult, and even in my work as a therapist, is I'm sometimes having to navigate situations where someone is essentially going to be predominating with their position and the other person is conceding with a lot of fear, anxiety, or stress.
And I know you're going to get to this, but I think a lot of it is talking about what we can personally control. and how we can maybe reduce our own internal anxiety and not project that onto other people, which is, I think, what they're talking about is going to happen.
Right.
Looks like we have a few questions coming in. How do you recommend we deal with family members who do not respect the seriousness of the virus?
That's very difficult, because I think that the reality is that I know there's differences between people in terms of how people's perceptions of the seriousness of the virus are. I guess my answer to that would be the tiebreaker might be following CDC, that is based on scientific evidence, that is based on experts that are doing the best they can to give some very concrete, as much as they can give some concrete answers. And so I certainly think that, you know, the situation we're in, which is some people naturally take things more seriously than others in a variety of other contexts of life. But in this particular situation, we do have what I'm calling some sort of an authority figure that is based on not speculation, but science. And I think science matters in this virus, and listening to people and to the concrete evidence is a way so that that is what is followed, as opposed to, I don't really think any of the experts would be saying predominantly that this is not serious.
I would agree, and thank you. Okay, here's a long one. I know you talked about wrestling with our own priorities when deciding to go back out into the world. I completely understand we all have different circumstances and histories that inform our decisions. But how should we take into account the circumstances of others when deciding whether or not to go into a social situation? How would you suggest processing dealing with the fact that a lot of other people will not be taking the time to consider the risks of exposing others? So very similar.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who this dialogue is between. So if this is between a child saying to their parent, my friends are all getting together and we have a situation where I'm not able to go to a friend's house yet, so my parents want to keep me home longer, okay? And it's a child asking that question. I think part of what you say to your child in that situation would be, I'm trying to answer her question or his question, but give it a little bit of context. I think part of how you handle the other person, their feelings, is to educate them about this decision is not being made out of trying to be for the child. You know, there's no punitive thing going on here. This isn't a disciplinary thing. This isn't mom or dad trying to be we want you to have a good time. You will be able to do some of those things again, but we are making a decision to make our health right now, our physical health, the priority, and socializing with friends, which is also something that we really want you to be able to have in your life, is going to be something that will happen soon. We can't exactly tell you when. So I think that who you're having the dialogue with, because in the question it's saying, you know, how do you take into account other people's feelings and needs? And in each scenario, I'd have to know specifically what the issue on the table is and who the dialogue is between. And then it would be a little bit easier to give some specific guidance.
I hear you saying, though, it's not a punishment and we have to take everyone's safety into consideration.
Right.
Right? There's, I think, one more question before we let you get back. So there's some conversation about parents and being the parent of a child that is extremely compromised and the fear of leaving the house in that situation. How do you start?
Okay, well, that's one of the things that I was going to be getting to, but I'm going to go to it right now.
Okay.
I think you start, quite honestly, in any situation, but especially in a situation with somebody in your house who is compromised for any reason, with very little baby steps. Very little baby steps with taking precaution, like wearing a mask when you go out, keeping the social distance between you and the other people you might be with or where you're going. And so the small baby step might be with that particular person. It might be getting in the car, going for a ride, possibly parking, getting out of the car, going for a walk together, maybe seeing people outside and being able to wave. I think waving rather than running in today's world is always a better thing to do. And really being able to just that, maybe that's the outing, maybe that's all it was. And so one of the things that does help us as we proceed is to really do things very slowly, and to really, the first time we do it is the hardest, but as we do something repeatedly, it becomes less fear-based, especially when we see, well, I did whatever I did, and thank God we're all okay still.
Can I just say that I feel like sometimes with people I've spoken with, unless they've been touched by it personally, unless they know someone who's been sick, unless they know somebody who died, it's still very much ethereal. It's out there, right? We've been in the safety of our homes. And if you are lucky enough to not have been personally affected in your close circle, is it a protection? Is that a way we protect ourselves to say it's not that bad because you haven't felt that personal pain? Or how do you feel about that? Because I always say, like, you don't want to have to be given personal proof that this is real and dangerous. You don't want to have to grieve, and I think in a lot of ways we're grieving as a nation. We crossed 100,000 lives lost today. But why do you think that suspension of belief, not even about science, but just that this is all happening? Do you know what I'm saying?
Rabbi Jen, that's a good question, but I think we even can go back and think about an adolescent who are learning about consequences of various things that we teach our teenagers about. Who don't have to have it happen to them to realize that they're going to practice safe measures, and other people who unfortunately do, but I don't wish that on anyone.
I'm so sorry. I'm having some internet issues.
Okay, so Kari, I can see that you're having internet issues. Can you try to talk so I can see if I can understand you?
Okay, are we better?
I can understand. You're still pixelating, but we can understand you.
Okay. Rabbi Jen, did we get all the questions?
I think we did. I think Dr. Bayer could probably continue.
Okay, great.
So I will continue then. One of the things that happens, I'm going to speak about anxiety in general right now. And one of the things that happens with anxiety, the tendency is that we feel that we are powerless to our anxiety. It certainly is, whether we're having physical manifestations of our anxiety or we're having just a lot of tangential fleeting thoughts and branching thinking, with one thought leading to 2 to 4 to 8 very quickly. There's all different ways that anxiety affects us and how we experience it. But regardless, what it all has in common is that anxiety is a force that makes us feel out of control and uncomfortable. And we pretty much feel that we're powerless to it. And what I want to talk about in the next few moments is how we can empower ourselves to have what I always use this phrase, counterforces to anxiety. I use this example sometimes. If you sit all day long and you're sitting to the right and you sat all day long to the right, the only way you might balance or even it out is to try to move to the left. So essentially the things I'm going to talk about are things within your control that are able to help navigate some of this anxiety. So how do we empower ourselves in the face of uncertainty and anxiety? And one way that we can feel empowered is by doing something with our time during this time that feels constructive, productive, and useful, so that we're not ruminating, we're not sitting. The more time we have to sit and think, probably the more, which partly is the problem here because we've been in our homes with more times to sit and think, but the more productive and movement even within our home is a way for us to feel more, less anxious. So some people could feel empowered because they're working on the front lines of the medical field. And even though that's their profession, it gives them a sense of purpose in what they're doing every day and fighting this virus and helping people survive. Some people may feel empowered because they're doing research on the virus, or they feel empowered because they want to read as much as they can about the virus and educate themselves about the epidemiology of the virus. Sometimes we feel empowered, many of us, and certainly it's a strong suggestion that if we're going to be going out around others and it's respectful, socially responsible, part of empowerment is wearing a mask right now. Some people feel empowered when they can physically not touch someone or hug them or because that's one of the best ways to reduce anxiety, and we're not being able to do that as much right now. But certainly being able to talk to people, connect with them virtually, having the Zoom calls that we've been having. The best part of it is all the birthday parties we've seen and celebrations and ways people have honored some of the occasions. We haven't lost our human spirit of how to connect with people, and that's another way to alter and to decrease anxiety. For someone else, it could be writing in a journal or writing about their experience. My mom, for example, with all of her grandchildren, has been interviewing all of the grandkids about their experience during this time and handling it by writing her memoir about how everybody feels. And that's a very constructive way to handle anxiety. For me, it's talking to people. That's what I do. I talk to my friends, I talk to my clients. And so being able to talk and heal and listen is a way that I handle my anxiety. But I think what is important about, and I'm going to get to some more specific anxiety management techniques, that will be the last segment of what I talk about. But I think what's important is that we do recognize that we're in the midst of a crisis. Every crisis has a beginning and a middle and an end. The scariest part in any crisis is the ascending. I think of crisis like the bell curve. And as we're climbing up, even like on a roller coaster, there's this anticipatory anxiety of when's the peak and what's the peak, and then coming down, you sort of know you're going down. Crises do have beginnings, middles, and ends. And one of the things that I want to keep in mind and really emphasize today is that we will get through this. This will have an end. I don't know when, no one knows when, but it will end. And I will be talking about some specific ways techniques to manage anxiety, but I'll pause again to see if anybody has questions at this point.
Thank you. I love reiterating that it's temporary. We just have to keep telling ourselves this is temporary and we are going to come out of it. Rabbi Jen, I'm sorry, I missed where you stopped, what the last question was.
Okay, so I will read it. It says, as congregations begin to reopen their doors, how do we help our members who are drawn most to the building, but who are most at risk, our aging populations, understand that they should stay home? So I want you to know that your rabbis, all of us from here in the West Bloomfield Hills, Farmington Hills area, Ann Arbor, East Lansing, and even as far as Kalamazoo, Flint, we've all been talking regularly, actually, about what all of that looks like. We have also included all of the executive directors from all of these congregations, and last week had a meeting with 88 of us. And the consensus is and this crosses all denominations, is that we're not opening till we know it's safe. We are all following the CDC guidelines. And right now in Michigan, we're in a stay-at-home order. And if you have to be together, it's 10 people or less. I just came from doing a funeral, and I can say that that is something that is being strictly followed. And it's for the health of the family that are at the service, and it's for the health of the clergy so that we can continue to do what we're doing. Once we have decided that it is safe to open our buildings, I don't know when that is. I wish I could say that I did, but I don't. If some miracle comes along and there's a vaccine and we're all vaccinated very quickly, we would love to be back in Temple, Israel, as well, as I know all my colleagues in town want to be back in their sanctuaries. I have a feeling that whenever it is we are able to go back, that we will still be social distancing. We might still be wearing masks. And again, we are going to follow the strictest CDC guidelines. As for keeping people who are in populations that should not be there, I think this is part of, we were talking about keeping our parents safe and our grandparents safe. And like, we want to say to those people, no, you cannot come here. At a certain point, we know that adults can make their decisions. But me as a rabbi, if I saw somebody coming into Temple Israel, without a mask, and we're supposed to be in masks, I am going to stop that person and say, you need to put a mask on. And again, we've talked about it being a respectful thing to do. It's also a public health issue. We're keeping each other healthy. So I would say, like we've been saying before, it's really important for everyone to make good choices for themselves and encourage our loved ones to make good choices for themselves. And if someone is in a vulnerable population or an older age group, then I think we can always encourage and advise. But at the end of the day, I don't think I can stop anyone from coming to Temple Israel.
And we all want to be back. We all want to be back and back building, but safety has to come first.
It has to. And it's been an agreement, like I said, across the board. It was all Reform congregations, conservative congregations, and a few of the modern Orthodox. And, some congregations who don't have the ability to Zoom and stream are obviously, hoping that this gets resolved. I mean, we all are, but at least we've been able to keep in touch through live stream, Facebook Live, Zoom. We've been able to have Shabbat together, Yisker, graduations, all kinds of beautiful, beautiful things. So we're looking to support each other, the larger congregations, the smaller congregations, and advise each other. But we have to use good, what is the word I'm looking for? We have to use seichel,
yes.
Right? So seichel, right? Does everyone know seichel? Yeah, Kari, do we think that's
yes.
like ubiquitous?
Yes.
Seichel is like smarts, right? Smarts,
yes. Yeah. Use your brains.
Right.
Make good choices.
Yeah. Make good choices.
Make good
right?
choices.
Exactly. Make good choices. Right.
So there's a question. We know there's a risk, but figuring out how little by little we are willing to take the risk of enlarging our bubbles. And there's a lot of talk about our personal bubbles and how we're going to expand those. And we're starting with less than 10 people, like what Rabbi Jen said. That's the guideline right now. That's what we're being asked to do. And like Dr. Bayer said, it's baby steps. We have to take those baby steps.
And those are for public gatherings. Like under Michigan State home order, you're really not supposed to have anyone in your home. And so if you're uncomfortable with that, use the Michigan State home order to buy yourself time till June 12th, and then maybe, decide how you're going to open up your concentric circles. Use this, what is that, 3 weeks, about 3 weeks? Oh no, maybe a little less.
2.5, yeah.
Yeah, to prepare yourself for these opening up of your circles.
There was also a really great NPR article about what's low risk, medium risk, and high risk that tells you how to address all of these issues. And I think Dr. Bayer is going to talk a little bit more about that also. There's one last question. How do we know when we can hug family members outside of our household?
Well, I don't think that's my area of expertise because I think that's really epidemiological, medical question. So I won't even try to answer it, but I will share that I'd love to know the answer to that too, because hugging is how we feel connected to people, and it's what makes us feel. That's one of the things I miss the most, honestly, is not hugging. And I could even be social distancing from my family, but to not hug my nieces or nephews or children or sisters or parents, brother-in-laws in my family, it's very, very difficult. It's friends as well. I'm a hugger. So I don't know the answer. Wish I did.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the hardest parts in our house, is keeping the generations apart. We're very much, and it takes a village to raise children. That also goes for my sister and brother-in-law and niece who had to come home from Michigan State. We're very used to being together, and that's how we like it. But Risa and I, my sister and I, talk about this all the time. And as much as we would love to hug our parents and hold them, we've had birthdays, we've had Mother's Day, we've had all these things. You know, Risa and I keep saying to each other, we're in this for God willing, please God, poo-poo, hopefully the 20 years that we have, that we want with them in the future. So we're trying, Risa calls it the long game, that we're trying to play the long game. And as much as we want those hugs, please God, I need them in my life for a lot longer.
The other thing that's beautiful, and I think that we're all, well, many of us share that philosophy, I shouldn't say all, and I think that's what makes this situation so challenging, is there are such different opinions. But I do want to say something that might be help with, before I go into some of the specific reduction of anxiety strategies, something to just sort of put this in a little bit of perspective. And that is that if we really think about this, some of what we're experiencing now is a very visible, highlighted, magnified situation where we are assessing what we're going to do versus the risk. It's very much in our face. The reality is we do that all the time. We do that all the time. We do that in the foods we choose to eat. We do that in what we choose to, putting on a seatbelt when we get into a car, but still choosing to get into a car. We do that in so many ways, hundreds and thousands of ways, every single day of our lives. And we really don't think about it as, I'm taking a risk and I'm moving. What's my, how am I balancing this? We just do these things. And I just want to give a little levity to what is obviously a very heavy situation and say, I'm not trying to minimize the severity or the intensity of this virus or the threat, but I am trying to put it in a little perspective that if we really think about it, we've been doing this for a lot longer than we realize, but we don't know it. It's such an integrated part of how we go about our lives. And there may be differences between family members as it is on that. Someone might be wanting to go drive in the middle of a snowstorm, and some other family member might be saying, please don't go out. So, this is not really, it may feel new, but this really isn't so new in terms of the dynamics here. So maybe this is a good time. Anxiety. I already talked about the small steps. I already talked about that the first time we do something is the hardest. So beyond that, really sharing your feelings is an anxiety reducer. And I certainly feel like, obviously, I'm a bit biased in terms of the department of wanting to process feelings, but the reality is when you hold something in and you internalize, it really does create more anxiety for a lot of people. Lots of people are internalizers, but they may have stomach aches or headaches. It comes out in different ways. So certainly verbalizing it with somebody that you trust. Doesn't have to be a professional. It could be a professional, but somebody that you feel comfortable sharing your fears with. Sometimes just saying it out loud and just saying the worst case scenario of what you're fearing or what's going on or what you're concerned about doesn't make it go away, but makes you feel less isolated and certainly not as alone in your head. Making a gratitude list, I feel that is so important because even in the midst of loss and fear, there's things to be grateful and joyful for. So whether you get up in the morning or before you go to bed at night, thinking of a few things you're grateful for is certainly a way to stay in the positive energy zone of life. We are sensory beings. And when we walk into a spa, any of us who ever walked into a spa or or at the beach, it plays on our sensory, how sensitive we are to sensory cues. So when you walk in a spa, it could be the calming music, it could be the smell. It smells like something that's just so inviting. And before you even have your spa treatment, you're just already feeling more relaxed. And the same with the beach. You go and you put your toes in the sand or you feel the breeze on your back or the water on your toes. And so we don't have to go to the beach or be at the spa in order to take a sensory experience into our own home. And so if you even just found a little place in your house that you could go and call in your own head your safe spot and sit there and make it your own sensory calming experience, whether it's having a cozy blanket or whether it's having a cup of hot tea or whether it's putting on some music, something, think of all the different senses, what it is that kind of soothes you in that moment, but going and taking some deep breaths and sitting in that setting is a very useful way to feel less anxious. In addition to that, we use our imaginations to rev up anxiety all the time, thinking of worst case scenarios and oh my goodnesses, and one thought leads to, I talked about that, the branching thinking, 1 leads to 2, leads to 4, leads to 8. But we can use our imaginations to envision being in a safe space. This is all behind us, being with your loved ones, being in a place, picturing really vividly what that scene is. Making it a good story. What do you see? What color is the sky? What do you hear? What do you taste? And really trying to take the breath. Yoga operates on this principle, but science shows that we can't simultaneously be holding our breath and breathing. It's just impossible. So taking a breath, taking some deep breaths in and out while you're visualizing these things are a way to really decrease anxiety. I do this for my clients a lot, have them close their eyes and go on a sensory experience. And lots of times the message I hear is, can I just go to sleep now after it's all over? Meditation, I know that's a big buzzword. It has been for a long time, but it really can be a way to clear our mind and to get into a more centered place. There's all kinds of apps on the phones these days, Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer. They're very useful resources to get out of your head into, go into a different place with your head where you can be calming and reach your center. Music is a huge energy shifter. And we've been listening to a lot of music in our home and playing, games with music on in the background. When my daughter was in town, which was the best part of the pandemic for me, with her boyfriend, and we were playing lots of games, lots of card games at night, and had music on a lot. But that's just a very calming kind of, just kind of makes you get out of your head as well and into what you're doing. And another aspect is just picturing dialing down your anxiety. So when you you get in your shower, there's a dial. One side is hot, one side is cold, blue and red often. Picture one side is high anxiety and one side is calm. And really just tell yourself, I'm making a conscious decision to dial down towards the calm and take some deep breaths. And these are all strategies that really, whether we're in a pandemic or not, are really effective ways to help reduce our anxiety.
Excellent, wonderful tips and techniques. Thank you. Thank you so much. There's also one other app that Rabbi Bennett told me about, a journaling app called Jour, Jour. And it's a very quick gratitude, 3 questions a day. It's a free app. It's fabulous. So that's another one that we're going to add in there. There's another question more about general fear and anxiety of catching the virus and being alone, and how to deal with those fears and the ability to start taking the baby steps.
I cut out, Kari.
Oh, sorry about that. Am I back now?
So the question was about, while we're in isolation, there are many people who are living alone, and their fear is, what will happen if I get sick? What do I do? I'm already in isolation, which is very difficult. What happens? How do you control your fear over this getting sick by yourself?
Well, that I think is probably at the root of what anyone who's got someone they love or care about who's living alone, one of the fears that is a very strong reality, because what we're living in is a virus that is made us all go into this we've never done this before. We're going into our homes. Everything in our life's changed, and certainly living alone presents the most challenging stress, I think, in isolation of all. I don't really feel like, I guess what I would say for that person living alone is that, to the degree that they can connect with people that are still in touch with them, that still can come and check on them, that can drop off things to them so that they're not completely cut off from anyone being in their lives. Sometimes this is an example, though, and it's not from me. Certainly, I'm not putting myself in the medical expertise position, but you know, there are times when I think other factors besides prevention and preventing ourselves from getting sick sort of tip the scales in terms of caring for a loved one. And so I know there have been family members who have made exceptions to, even though you're not supposed to be in someone's home, who have gone into someone's home if it's their parent who has been sick or a loved one, or and been there to help them, albeit with protection and changing their clothes as soon as they leave and wearing lots of layers of masks. But, you know, I don't think it's my position to say any of the shoulds and shouldn'ts, but I think there are times that we have to, that prevention no longer and protection no longer is the most relevant factor. And maybe somebody being able to be there for a person who is alone in a time of need could potentially be possible.
And we're right back to compromising and doing what works for us and still being safe. And we have to take all of those things into consideration. So thank you for all of your amazing tips and coping skills and techniques. I think your message came through very loud and clear. I know there are lots of people listening, and I hope that you have helped to calm their anxiety a little bit. Rabbi Jen?
I want to just echo what Kari is saying. Thank you so much. I think there are a lot of people who haven't had the opportunity to ask these questions before, and who have had an opportunity to reach out. And I just think this has been absolutely invaluable moving forward in this, as we continue in this crisis.
And it's all baby steps. Just take it slow. And if you haven't been outside, go outside, go for a little walk, do things in very baby steps and take it slow. And we're all here for you.
And I think what I would like to end with is really that I do believe that, as I said, in every part of my being, I have never seen a crisis that has not come to an end. And I think the biggest, most challenging, the most challenging part of this is we have no idea when this will end, but we often don't know when a crisis will end. And I think what I'd like to leave people with is the knowledge that it will end, that we will get through this. And I also want to say that through adversity is how we build resilience. And I know it may not feel it in the moment, because when you're in it, you can't recognize the way that you're becoming stronger and the way in which you're becoming wiser. But we will have tools from this experience that we will appreciate and can draw on later in life that we aren't appreciating now. Because when you're in the middle of a crisis, all you know is fear and panic and tears and how am I going to get through it, and a lot of the emotions that feel overwhelming. But when you have come on the other side and you have built resilience through it, there's so much positive energy that we will all appreciate as we move forward with this. So please know that we're all building resilience in this very challenging time.
Thank you. And thank you all so much.
I think that's a perfect way to end our session.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you for listening.
Thank you. Bye.